The courtroom was as silent as a grave. The judge's gavel came down with a force that shattered the last fragile hope lingering in the air. A guilty, Nathan Reed sat there, handcuffed, his hollow gaze fixed on the cold wooden floor. 15 years of dedicated service to the police force. And never once had he imagined he'd find himself in this position. He had screamed his innocence, sworn that it was all a setup, an elaborate, cruel conspiracy designed to take him down. But the jury didn't believe him. The evidence, despite him knowing it had been planted, was too damning to fight against. But the worst part wasn't the sentence. It was losing Coda near the back of the courtroom. Coda, his loyal German Shepherd partner, watched him with warm golden eyes filled with unease. The dog didn't understand what was happening, but it knew something was terribly wrong. To Nathan, Coda wasn't just a partner, he was family. The one who had been by his side through life or death situations. Always there in the most dangerous moments. The thought of never seeing him again was unbearable. The judge rose from his seat, preparing to leave. Before they could drag Nathan away forever, he spoke up, his voice raw but resolute. "Your Honor," he took a deep breath. "Before I go, can I say bye to Coda?" A murmur rippled through the courtroom. All eyes turned to the judge, awaiting his decision. He hesitated, studying Nathan for a long moment, then finally gave a small nod. The 3 minutes, the doors opened, and in an instant, Coda bolted forward. His paws pounded against the tile floor as he rushed to Nathan. No one had to tell him. He knew this was their last moment together. Nathan dropped to his knees, wrapping his arms tightly around his partner. "I'm sorry, Coda." But his voice cracked as tears fell onto the dog's thick fur. "I let you down. I won't be able to protect you anymore." Coda whimpered, pressing his head against Nathan's chest as if trying to comfort him. And then suddenly his body tensed. His nose twitched as he sniffed rapidly around Nathan's jacket. Then, he barked a sharp, commanding bark that cut through the heavy silence of the room. Nathan's breath caught. Coda yanked at Nathan's jacket, his claws scratching against the fabric as his barking grew more frantic. The officers nearby frowned, their curiosity piqued. One of them stepped forward, cautiously reaching out to check. Then clink. A small object tumbled to the floor. The entire courtroom froze. It was a recording device. The prosecutor's face drained of color. He lunged forward, his voice sharp with panic. "This means nothing. It's just a coincidence." But Coda kept barking, his stance rigid, his eyes unwavering. Nathan stared at the tiny recorder lying on the floor. His hands trembled. His heart pounded against his ribs. If it contained what he thought it might, if there was even the slightest chance, this could be the truth that would save him. The courtroom remained in stunned silence. The small device sat in the center of the floor, its metallic casing gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights. Beside Nathan, Coda stood tall, his black and gold fur bristling. His sharp eyes locked onto the recorder. Barked again, loud and resolute, the sound echoing through the chamber like a demand for justice. Every gaze in the room fixated on the device, the air thick with tension. "Pick it up." The judge's voice cut through the silence, low, commanding, absolute. A nearby officer hesitated, then bent down, retrieving the device. He held it up for all to see, his face a mix of confusion and apprehension. "What is this?" the judge demanded, his piercing gaze shifting to the prosecutor. The once confident man was now visibly sweating. He cleared his throat, struggling to regain composure. "Your Honor, this is irrelevant. This is not admissible evidence." He stammered, clearly. "This is some sort of outside interference." Interference. The judge's voice turned razor sharp. Inside this courtroom, during a sentencing, the prosecutor was speechless. The judge turned to the officer still holding the recording device. "Play it." The entire courtroom held its breath. The officer nodded, his hands trembling as he pressed the button. A faint static crackled through the speakers. At first, just white noise. Then, a voice, gravelly deliberate and chillingly clear, to plant the evidence. No one will suspect a thing. Raid's spotless record makes him the perfect fall guy. Just get it done. The courtroom erupted in a collective gasp. Nathan felt his blood turn to ice. His heartbeat pounded his ears, his breath quick and shallow. He knew that voice. Captain Ray Harding. The man he had trusted, the leader he had served with unwavering loyalty for years. The man who had betrayed him. The prosecutor went pale. In a split second of sheer panic, he lunged at the officer holding the recorder, as if he could somehow stop the inevitable. "Fetus nog," he shouted. Bang. The judge's gavel slammed down. Sit down. His voice wasn't loud, but it was razor sharp, slicing through the chows like a blade. The prosecutor froze. Nathan could hardly process what was happening in the span of mere minutes. The truth had unraveled before everyone's eyes. He wasn't just a man wrongfully convicted. Was a pawn in a deep, calculated conspiracy. Beside him, Coda remained tense, ears perked, his entire body poised in silent vigilance. He didn't understand everything that had transpired, but he knew. He knew he had just found the key to saving his best friend. The judge leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable, shadowed with thought. This trial is not over. His voice was steady but absolute. Officer, return the defendant to his holding cell. Secure that recording as evidence. This case is officially reopened. A ripple of murmurs spread through the courtroom. The prosecutor stammered something, but no one was listening anymore. Nathan took a deep breath. For the first time in what felt like an eternity of despair, he saw a glimmer of hope. As he was led away, he turned back, his gaze locking onto Coda. The loyal German shepherd stood firm, watching him with those sharp, unwavering eyes, filled with devotion and determination. Nathan clenched his fists. He made a silent promise, to himself and to Coda. He would not let this injustice stand. He would fight. And this time, he wouldn't fight alone. Back in the cold confines of his jail cell, Nathan Reed sat on the hard metal bench, staring blankly at the concrete wall. The silence was suffocating, but his mind was anything but still. The events of the past hour replayed over and over, piece falling into place, each revelation hitting harder. Coda's sharp instincts had uncovered what no one else had noticed. Evidence of a dangerous conspiracy. That tiny recorder could be his only chance at freedom, but the truth that had been exposed didn't just bring hope. It brought betrayal. Captain Ray Harding, the man who had mentored him, the leader he had trusted, the superior he had respected for years, the very man who had thrown him to the wolves. Nathan's hands curled into fists, his knuckles turning white under the pressure, his jaw tightened, his chest rising and falling with barely contained fury. How deep did this conspiracy run? How many people were involved? And the most important question of all, why? He had no answers. But he knew one thing for certain: he would not let this truth be buried. In the dimly lit office of the judge, the glow from a desk lamp cast deep shadows across his furrowed brow. On the polished wooden surface before him, the small recording device sat motionless, playing and replaying the damning words that had shattered an entire courtroom. Plant the evidence. No one will suspect a thing. Reed's clean record makes him the perfect fall guy. Do it now. That voice, Captain Ray Harding's voice, was unmistakable, but beneath another voice, deeper and more resolute, lingered. Someone else was involved, someone still unknown. The judge narrowed his eyes, his hands tightening into fists against the desk. He needed no further proof. This was no ordinary case. This was a meticulously orchestrated conspiracy from within the system itself. Reaching forward, he pressed the intercom button. Bring Captain Harding to my office. Immediately, his voice was loud, cold as steel. Outside the courtroom, Captain Ray Harding leaned casually against the wall, hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable but confident. He had watched the trial unfold from a distance, certain that everything had gone according to plan. Nathan Reed, the pawn he had chosen, was convicted. Soon it would all be over. Then a uniformed officer approached. The judge is requesting your presence in his office. Immediately. A flicker of unease crossed Harding's eyes, but he masked it quickly. Straightening up, he adjusted his tie, his movements deliberate, composed. What's this about? He asked, his voice steady. But beneath the surface, something cold coiled in his gut. The officer didn't answer. He simply gestured for Harding to follow. Harding exhaled slowly, nodded, and began walking down the long hallway. His steps were measured, confident, but his heart was beating faster than usual. When he reached the heavy wooden door of the judge's office, he hesitated. Just for a fraction of a second. Adjusting his color once more, he pushed the door open. The judge sat behind his desk, sharp eyes boring into him as he stepped inside. Gone was the polite formality. Only cold scrutiny remained, and on the desk, sitting ominously in the center, lay the recorder, a silent accuser. Harding cast a brief glance at the recorder but quickly shifted his attention back to the judge. "Your Honor, I was told you wanted to see me," he said, his tone measured and calm. But deep inside he could feel it anger. The judge nodded slowly, his fingers tapping lightly against the desk. "Do you have a seat, Captain Harding?" There was something in that voice, something subtle, yet undeniably heavy, that made Harding, despite his composure, feel the weight of an invisible force pressing down on. He pulled out a chair, sat down, and crossed his arms over his chest, trying to exude confidence. The judge said nothing at first. Instead, he reached forward and pressed play. The voice filled the room again. Unmistakable, inescapable. Harding stiffened. For a split second, everything slowed. Every word, every syllable, every breath from that recording echoed through the office. Not just from the small device, but from somewhere deeper. His conscience. A conscience he had long since buried. The judge's eyes never left him. "Do you have anything to say, Captain Harding?" Harding's lips pressed into a thin line. A bead of sweat rolled down his temple. He knew that no excuse would save him now. But he also knew something else. If he was going down, he wouldn't go down easily. Inside the judge's office, the atmosphere was suffocating. Seated behind his desk, the judge remained silent, his sharp gaze locked onto Captain Ray Harding as he entered. Harding nodded politely, forcing his posture to remain composed. But the rigid set of his shoulders betrayed him. "You called for me, Your Honor?" Harding asked, his voice steady, but his eyes flickered toward the recorder on the desk. And that was where the mask slipped. The judge didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned forward, tapping his fingers lightly against the device. A small sound. Yet it carried the weight of a hammer. "Do you want to explain this?" Harding hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, but then quickly regained his composure. His lips curled into a smirk, laced with indifference. "I'm not sure what you're implying, Your Honor," he said evenly, as if the entire matter was beneath his concern. The judge didn't respond. He simply reached forward and pressed play. Silence filled the room, broken only by the faint static from the recorder. Then the voice played. Harding's voice. "Plant the evidence. No one will suspect a thing. Reed's clean record makes him the perfect fall guy. Do it now." The words cut through the air like a blade. Harding's expression froze. For the briefest moment his face drained of color. But almost instantly, he masked it with a thin, dismissive smile. "Your Honor, this is absurd," he scoffed, crossing his arms. Anyone could have said those words. "You can't seriously believe that I don't believe." The judge's voice sliced through Harding's protest. "Unyielding. The act on evidence, and this," he gestured to the recorder, "is evidence of a crime. Possibly many crimes." The air grew thick, suffocating. Harding blinked. This time, his smoke grin wasn't quite as steady. The judge exhaled slowly, then issued his command. "Officers." The office door swung open. 2 uniformed officers entered, their footsteps deliberate, their presence undeniable. Harding turned, his composure cracking, the confidence in his eyes replaced by something far more primal. Panic. "What are you doing?" His voice rasped, the first hints of real fear slipping in his words. No one answered. The two officers advanced toward Harding, their eyes steady, unwavering. "Stop," a Harding bellowed, instinctively backing away. "I am the captain of this department. I am ordering you. You are being taken into custody for investigation." But the judge's voice rang out firm, absolute, undeniable. Harding's breath came faster. His pulse thundered in his ears. "It's an investigation," he spat, his voice sharp with disbelief. "But this is a joke. You have no right. Until the truth is uncovered. You are a suspect in obstruction of justice and evidence tampering." The judge's words fell like a hammer, and just like that, Harding's world collapsed. "Yo Perry making a huge mistake." He roared, threshing violently as the two officers seized his arms, twisting them behind his back. "He won't let thee stand. Do you hear me?" But no one cared about his desperate, frenzied protests anymore. The office door slammed shut behind him. The judge let out a slow, heavy breath, leaning back in his chair. His gaze drifted to the small recorder on his desk. If he needed to reassure himself that what had just happened was real. The web of corruption was starting to unravel, but he knew one thing for certain. Nathan Raid's story was far from over. This was only the beginning. The discovery of recording hit the department like a bomb. With Captain Ray Harding arrested, news of corruption spread like wildfire, tearing through the precinct like flames racing across dry grass. Whispers filled the halls. Some officers stood frozen, their faces etched with shock, unable to believe what they were hearing. Others exchanged worried glances, eyes flickering with uncertainty. Who would be next? Questions swirled like a storm around those in power. Who else was involved? How long had this conspiracy been in place? How many other cases had been manipulated? Meanwhile, Nathan Reed remained in his cell, completely unaware of the chaos brewing beyond the concrete walls that confined him. He sat on the hard cot, fists clenched. His mind raced, but one thought refused to leave him. Coda, his loyal partner. Coda had found the recorder. Without him, Nathan would have been buried alive under a crime he didn't commit. He closed his eyes, replaying the moment in the courtroom. Coda barking, relentless, his eyes sharp with intelligence and determination. If Coda could uncover that device, what else could he find? Across the police precinct, Coda had been taken to the Key 9 unit for assessment. Officer Sarah Mitchell, one of Nathan's closest colleagues, had personally volunteered to look after him while the case was under review. She couldn't stand the thought of Coda being separated from Nathan with no one to care for him. But since arriving, Coda hadn't been at ease. He paced restlessly inside his kennel, his tail low, ears constantly perked and alert. Every so often, he let out short, sharp barks, not random, not anxious, but calculated, deliberate. A warning. Sarah stood outside the kennel, arms crossed, brows furrowed. "He knows something is wrong," she murmured, watching Coda's every movement. She crouched down, her gaze locking with his deep, unwavering amber eyes. "Don't worry, buddy," she whispered. "We'll find the truth." But just as she stood up, she noticed something strange. Coda had pressed his nose against the kennel door, sniffing her jacket. Not just sniffing, tracking. Sarah froze, her heartbeat thundering in her chest. She had seen this behavior before. This wasn't random. Coda was searching for something. Sarah swallowed hard, a knot tightening in her stomach. Was this connected to Nathan's case? Or was she just imagining things? For a brief moment, she hesitated. Then she met Coda's unwavering gaze. She couldn't ignore this. Taking a breath, she unlatched the kennel door and grabbed the leash. "All right, buddy," she said, her voice steadier now. "Show me what you were trying to say." Coda shivered with anticipation, then immediately lunged forward, tugging hard. He had caught a scent, and he wouldn't stop until he found the truth. Coda pulled Sarah through the station, moving with purpose, leading her toward a dimly lit storage area in the back of the precinct. Sarah had to jog to keep up. When they arrived, Coda skidded to a stop in front of a row of old lockers. He sniffed frantically, his nose pressing against the cool metal. Then he started scratching. Hard, his claws raked against a lower locker, the scraping sound echoing through the quiet space. Sarah's heart pounded. She glanced at the nameplate. Nathan Reed. Her throat went dried. With slightly trembling fingers, she pulled out her keyring and slid a key into the lock. The door swung open. Inside, beneath a few neatly folded uniforms, was a small brown envelope plane, unmarked. Sarah hesitated for just a second. Then, she reached inside and pulled it out. She unfolded the caught in her throat. Photographs, grainy but unmistakable. Captain Ray Harding, standing next to a man Sarah recognized immediately. Vincent Markin, a name that sent a chill down her spine. One of the most notorious crime lords in the city. Sarah flipped through the photographs, her stomach tightening as the next image revealed a handshake and a thick envelope of cash being exchanged. Undeniable proof. That wasn't it all. She reached further inside and pulled out a stack of documents tucked behind the photos. Her eyes scanned the contents, her breath catching as the truth sank in. A list of bribery transactions. Detailed records of every time Harding had taken money from Markin to bury certain cases, and among them, one name appeared over and over again. Nathan Reed. His conviction had been rigged from the start. Sarah's grip on the documents tightened, her hands trembling with rage. Slowly she glanced down at Coda. The German shepherd stared back up at her, his amber eyes burning with the same unyielding determination. Sarah exhaled shakily, her voice barely above a whisper. Coda had just found the most important piece of evidence. Coda let out a short, sharp bark as if confirming it. This time, Sarah knew for certain. The truth would not stay buried. Sarah Mitchell clutched the stack of documents tightly, her heart hammering as she processed the weight of what she had just uncovered. The photos. The illicit transactions. The courting Coda had discovered. Piece by piece, the puzzle had finally come together. A picture of crime, betrayal, and corruption. And now, it was time to expose it. Ray Harding hadn't just framed Nathan Reed. He was part of something much bigger. Sarah inhaled deeply, forcing herself to steady the rage burning in her chest. She couldn't let her emotions take over. She needed to act. Immediately, she pulled out her phone and called the judge's office. Her voice was firm, unwavering as she reported that she had irrefutable evidence, proving Nathan's case had been fabricated. But even as she made the call, she knew this wasn't over. Harding couldn't have acted alone. A conspiracy this deep, this intricate, required powerful backers, and the most important question now was, how many others were involved? Sarah clenched her fists, her expression cold, unreadable. She had once believed she knew this precinct inside and out. Now she wasn't so sure. Beside her, Coda sat silently, his sharp eyes watching her every move, as if he, too, understood the weight of what they had just uncovered. Sarah looked down at her loyal companion. A small smile flickered across her lips, a moment of light amid the storm brewing in her mind. Reaching out, she gently scratched behind Coda's ear. Nathan was right, she murmured, her voice quiet but thick with emotion. You really are the best partner anyone could ask for. Coda lifted his head, his tail giving a small wag, but his eyes remained locked, focused. He knew this fight wasn't over, and he was ready to see it through. Inside the evidence storage room, the dim fluorescent lights flickered, casting pale shadows over the photographs spread out on the table. Sarah Mitchell stood motionless, her gaze fixed on them, her chest tight with the weight of realization. These photos didn't just prove Ray Harding's betrayal. They exposed something far bigger. Harding wasn't just a corrupt cop. He was a link in a carefully concealed system of corruption. The documents Coda had uncovered didn't just list Harding's shady dealings. They revealed suspicious financial transactions, the names of high-ranking officials, and a web of manipulation that stretched far beyond Nathan Reed's case. Sarah flipped through the pages, her heartbeat quickening as horrifying truths unraveled before her eyes. She had always believed in justice, believed in the system she had sworn to serve, but now, that very system was rotting from the inside out. Her fingers curled into a tight fist. Across the room, Coda sat in absolute silence, his sharp golden eyes locked onto her. He didn't bark, didn't move, but there was something in his posture, an alertness, a quiet understanding, that told Sarah he, too, could sense something was deeply wrong. She whispered under breath, her voice barely audible. "It's not just Nathan." Swallowing hard, she scanned the list of names. This goes much deeper. A shiver ran down her spine. She knew she had just stumbled onto something far more dangerous. But she also knew one thing for certain. She couldn't stay silent. Taking a deep breath, she pulled out her phone and dialed a number. No intermediaries, no reporting up the chain of command. She called the judge directly. Her voice was calm, but every word was sharp as a blade. "I found something you need to see. Immediately." 1 hour later, the documents Sarah Mitchell had uncovered sat on the judge's desk. The office lights cast sharp shadows across the judge's face, every tense line etched with the weight of revelation as he flipped through the pages filled with dark secrets. The photographs, the illicit transactions, the names that should have never surfaced in an internal investigation. The judge exhaled slowly, his gaze darkening. "This is worse than I imagined." He looked up, his voice so heavy, so low, that it seemed to silence the entire room. "If these documents are accurate, Nathan Reid isn't just innocent. He's the victim of a department-wide cover-up." The room was so still. The tick of the clock felt deafening. Sarah clenched her fist, rage boiling inside her. "Then what do we do, Your Honor?" she asked, her voice firm. The judge didn't answer immediately. Instead, he rose to his feet, his expression set with determination. "We hold an emergency hearing." And just like that, the order was given. The news of Nathan Reid's case being reopened tore through the precinct like an earthquake. Whispers in the hallways erupted into heated arguments. Panic set in. Some of the officers who had testified against Nathan started to sweat. They had believed it was over, that the case had been buried for good. But now, the truth was coming to light. Inside a dimly lit office down a secluded hallway, Lieutenant Marcus Hale sat motionless. His eyes were locked onto his computer screen, reading the internal department memo, "Emergency hearing scheduled." A cold sweat crept down his spine. He had signed the false reports on Nathan's case. And now, it was all unraveling. He had stood before the court, sworn under oath that the evidence against Nathan was solid. And now, everything was about to unravel. Marcus swallowed hard, his fingers trembling as he dialed an unlisted number. The moment the line connected, he whispered, his voice tight with panic. "Do we have a problem?" He glanced around nervously before continuing. "If hearing is happening, if we don't act now, there's no way out. Silence." Then a low, measured voice spoke on the other end. "Eliminate the problem." Marcus gripped the phone tighter, his pulse pounding in his ears. He knew exactly what that meant. Meanwhile, inside his cell, Nathan Reid remained unaware of the storm brewing outside. He sat on the hard metal bench, his head bowed, his mind turning over the events that had led him here. A cold draft whispered through the bars, making him lift his head. A strange unease crawled up his spine. His instincts told him this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. The heavy clang of a door unlocking cut through the silence. The iron bars rattled as a key turned in the lock. Nathan's eyes snapped up, sharp and alert, as he assessed the officers standing just beyond the cell bars. The Reid. "Come with me." Something was wrong. This wasn't standard protocol. This wasn't an interrogation. And it wasn't the hearing. The air in the detention block felt different today, charged with an odd, electric tension. Muffled whispers passed between officers. Glances were exchanged, furtive, uneasy. Something was happening. And whatever it was, It wasn't good. Nathan's heart pounded as he stepped out of his cell, following the officer leading the way. But they weren't heading toward the interrogation room. They were going to the secure briefing room. The door swung open. The moment he stepped inside, Nathan knew something had changed. Two people sat waiting for him. The judge, Sarah Mitchell. Coda, his loyal partner, sat attentively next to Sarah, his tail giving a small wag. His sharp amber eyes locked onto Nathan. A wave of emotion crashed through him. Nathan forced himself to stay composed, but deep down, he knew everything had changed. His gaze shifted to the table. A stack of thick documents lay spread across it, photographs, Rid's reports. And Nathan froze. A list of names. Names connected to his case. The judge slid the files toward Nathan, his expression firm but carrying the weight of justice. "We just received this evidence." His voice was steady, heavy with significance. "It proves Harding was corrupt. And most importantly, it confirms that the evidence used to convict you was fabricated." Nathan's fingers tightened as he flipped through the pages. Photographs of Harding meeting with Vincent Markin. Cash transactions. Dirty money laundered through falsified contracts. And the most stunning piece. Copies of the falsified evidence planted in his case. This wasn't just a wrongful conviction. This was a calculated conspiracy designed to destroy him. Nathan's chest rose and fell sharply. His throat tightened. His lips trembled as he spoke. "So." The judge met his gaze steady, resolute, with not a trace of doubt left. "It means you're free." For a moment, the world around Nathan seemed to stop. That word had echoed in his mind for days. Distant dream he had never dared to reach for. And now, it was real. But as his eyes drifted back to the files on the table, as the list of names tied to this conspiracy burned into his vision, he knew this wasn't over. What happens next? Nathan Reed has been freed, but his fight is far from over. With the evidence in hand, he and Sarah Mitchell must face a terrifying truth. The corruption runs far deeper than they imagined. Harding was just a pawn. The real masterminds are still in the shadows, manipulating justice to protect their power. Now, Nathan is no longer just a falsely accused officer. He's the only one who can bring the truth to light. But can he stand against a force more powerful, more dangerous than he ever imagined? Can Sarah and Coda help him bring down the entire conspiracy before it's too late? When darkness closes in, will the truth be strong enough to shatter it all? Share your thoughts in the comments. Do you think Nathan will succeed? Who is really behind it all? Let's discuss. Nathan Reed stepped out of the courthouse, inhaling deeply. The air outside was lighter than the suffocating walls of his cell. But the weight on his shoulders was heavier than ever, because he wasn't truly free. Not yet. The truth was still waiting to be exposed. The moment the courthouse doors swung open, a wave of reporters surged toward him like a relentless tide. "Parade, how do you feel about your release? Do you have anything to say about the corruption in your case? Do you know who else is involved in the conspiracy?" The questions came fast, sharp, relentless, each one slicing through the air like a blade. But Nathan didn't stop. He ignored them, because right now, the only thing he focused on was Coda. His loyal partner walked beside him, ears alert, body poised for anything. In the chows of flashing cameras, in the deafening roar of voices, Coda was the only thing steady, certain, and true. Nathan reached down, his fingers brushing over Coda's head, and in those deep, unwavering eyes, he found something no reporter, no headline, no public opinion could give him. Trust, determination, and a silent reminder that this fight wasn't over. The truth was still waiting, and he wouldn't stop until he found it. Inside the courthouse, within a heavily secured briefing room, the judge had assembled a task force. There was no doubt left. This wit of corruption ran deeper than anyone had ever imagined. The documents Coda had uncovered had torn a massive hole in the system, exposing bribery rings, manipulated evidence, and shadowy figures pulling the strings from behind the scenes. Nathan Raid's case was just one of many that had been altered, and Captain Ray Harding, he was just the tip of the iceberg. Sarah Mitchell sat at the conference table, her gaze sweeping over the scattered reports and photographs before her. She had once believed Harding was the sole mastermind, but the deeper she dug, the more she realized he was just another piece in a much larger machine. This corruption wasn't contained within the police department. It extended to the prosecutor's office, to city council, to the closed-door meetings where powerful decisions were made in secrecy. A slow, simmering rage burned in Sarah's chest, now fully ignited. She couldn't let this continue. Her gaze snapped to the judge, her eyes filled with determination. "I want in on this task force." The judge nodded. "Mitch." "Not just in shell." His voice was steady, resolute. "I want you to lead it." Sarah drew a deep breath, her hands clenching at her sides. Because now, she wasn't just investigating a case. She was going to war against the forces that lurked in the shadows. Nathan Reed stepped down the courthouse steps, Coda moving silently beside him, matching his pace with perfect synchronicity. If they had never been apart, behind him, he knew the reporters were still swarming, their voices calling out, their cameras flashing. But right now he didn't care. He was free, but justice wasn't. A familiar voice cut through the noise. Ray, he turned. Sarah Mitchell was striding toward him, her face set with purpose. "We need you." She didn't waste time. No pretense. No small talk. "No one knows this department better than you." Nathan stared at her, silent for a few seconds. All those years he had given to the force, the times he had put his life in the hands of his fellow officers, the belief he once had in a system that was supposed to stand for justice. Better now, the department he had once worn a badge for was nothing more than a fractured shell of lies and manipulation. He turned to Coda. His partner gazed up at him, steady, unwavering. Coda didn't care about politics. He didn't care about titles. He didn't care about the shadowy figures pulling the strings. He cared about the truth. And so did Nathan. He took a deep breath, his jaw tightening as he turned back to Sarah. "Imamin." Nathan's voice was firm. Sarah nodded, but her eyes remained searching, assessing, for the department. Nathan shook his head. "No." His response was unwavering. Doing this for the truth, for the officers who are still fighting for justice." Sarah's expression softened. Deep down, Nathan Reed was still a cop who believed in doing what was right, no matter what had happened. No matter how broken the system was, he was still fighting. She smiled. "Then let's finish this." Nathan nodded and rested a hand on Coda's head. "This time, we bring everything to light." Nathan Reed and Sarah Mitchell dived in headfirst, working relentlessly, barely stopping to rest. Long nights blurred together, spent hunched over stacks of files, timelines, old case reports. They connected the dots, compared records, tracked inconsistencies, followed the money trail that the corruption had buried for years. They were in it alone, some office still loyal to justice, the ones who had worked under Harding without realizing his corruption, stepped forward to help. Others stayed silent, but in that silence Nathan and Sarah found confirmation. They were getting close. Inside abandoned office within the precinct, the air was still. Then the barked loud. "Urgent." Nathan's head snapped up, instincts kicking in. Something was here. Something they weren't supposed to find. Coda sniffed around an old filing cabinet, his sharp eyes locked onto a locked drawer. Sarah frowned. "There's something in there." It didn't take long to break the lock, and the moment the drawer swung open, a cascade of old files tumbled onto the floor. Forgotten, or rather hidden, unfinished cases, tampered witness statements, internal reports that were never filed. Sarah knelt down, picking up one of the folders. She flipped to the first page, and froze. Nathan's brow furrowed. "But what is it?" Slowly, Sarah lifted the file, her eyes like steel. These are the cases Harding covered up. She flipped through the pages, her voice dropping, and he wasn't the only one. Nathan's fist clenched. Then who else? Sarah met his gaze, her expression grim. Most of them are still in the system. The room fell into silence. A cold draft blew from the ventilation system, but the real chill came from the truth they had just uncovered. Harding might have been arrested, but the real masterminds were still in the shadows. Nathan's eyes flicked to Coda, who stood tall, his tail giving a slight wag. As if he knew. As if he understood they had just found something that changed everything. Nathan reached out, running a hand over Coda's head, his voice low as he whispered, "Once again, buddy, you are leading us to the truth." Sarah took a deep breath, determination burning in her eyes. "We need to dig deeper." Nathan nodded, his grip tightening around the stack of files. "And this time, we don't stop until we drag every last one of them into the light." The air in the briefing room grew thick as Nathan Reed and Sarah Mitchell closed in on the heart of the conspiracy. The files spread across the table held dark secrets, names that should have never appeared on a criminal watch list. But the closer they got to the truth, the closer danger followed. Coda's body tensed suddenly. His ears perked, his nose flaring as he sniffed the air. Nathan recognized the signal immediately. Sarah felt it too. Her hand drifted silently, the gun holstered at her hip. Then, the door burst open. A shadowy figure lunged in, weapon gleaming in his hand. Before anyone could react, Coda launched forward like a missile. His powerful jaws clamped onto the intruder's arm, dragging him down with bone-crushing force. The man screamed, his weapon clattering to the floor as Coda pinned him down, snarling viciously. Nathan didn't hesitate. He kicked the gun away in one swift motion and whipped his own weapon toward the second attacker storming in. "Don't move." His voice was a razor-sharp command, slicing through the chows like a blade. The second man froze, but his eyes said everything. He wasn't here to surrender. Sarah drew her gun, moving in sync with Nathan, covering his flank as she called for backup. Outside, footsteps thundered down the hallway. Nathan tightened his grip on his weapon. "You tell your friends to stand down," he ordered, his voice sharp and commanding. But the man didn't answer. His gaze flicked toward the door, waiting. Nathan realized it a second too late. Something small and metallic rolled across the floor. His heart slammed against his ribs. Tear gas grenade. Everything happened in a split second. Nathan saw Sarah turn sharply, her eyes widening as she recognized the threat. He didn't hesitate. "Move." He grabbed Sarah's arm, yanking her backward just as a thick white-gray cloud exploded into the room, swallowing them in a blending, suffocating storm. Coda still had his teeth locked onto the intruder's arm, but as the gas filled the space, the dog whimpered, his body convulsing as his eyes teared up from the burning chemicals. He couldn't breathe. Sarah drove her boot in the second man's chest, sending him crashing backward as she coughed violently, trying to keep from choking. Nathan lunged for Coda, pulling him up as his own throat burned raw. His voice was hoarse but fierce. "Agro, buddity." They rushed for the door, lungs screaming, eyes watering. They couldn't stop now. The storm had begun. And now, there was no turning back. The room was consumed by a thick cloud of tear gas, the burning fumes clawing at their throats, blending their eyes. Sarah clutched the files tightly, forcing herself to keep moving toward the emergency exit at the back. Nathan covered their six, his gun steady in his grip, while Coda moved in perfect sync, his body low, ready to take down anyone who dared stand in their way. They couldn't lose this evidence. They couldn't let this network of corruption stay hidden. But the moment the exit door burst open, bang, bang, gunfire ripped through the air. Sarah screamed, instinctively ducking as Nathan yanked her down just in time. They hit the ground hard, taking cover behind a metal dumpster in the narrow alley behind the building. Nathan gritted his teeth, his sharp gaze scanning the surroundings. They were waiting for them. They knew. "We were surrounded," Sarah panted, her grip tightening on the files, her breath still raw from the tear gas. Coda snarled fiercely, his ears erect, his golden eyes sweeping the ollie with razor-sharp focus. This wasn't an arrest. This was an execution. Nathan tightened his hold on his weapon, his mind working fast. Run. Not an option. The alley was a dead end, and their attackers had locked down the only exit. Fight. Not for long. They were outnumbered, and ammo wasn't infinite. They needed another way out fast. Their one chance. Nathan glanced at Sarah. Then his eyes locked onto Coda. An idea flashed through his mind. He leaned in, lowering his voice. "I have a plan. But we only get one shot." Sarah nodded without hesitation. She knew this was either their way out, or the end. Coda stared at Nathan, his amber eyes sharp, unwavering, ready for orders. Nathan placed a firm hand on his partner's head, his voice low but resolute. "This time, buddy, you're going to save us again." Nathan strained his ears, tracking the sounds of approaching footsteps. They were closing in fast. Time was running out. He turned to Sarah, his expression steel-hard, unwavering. "You trust me?" he asked, voice quiet but firm. Sarah didn't hesitate. "Yes." Nathan nodded once. "Then follow my lead." He yanked off his jacket, shoving it into Sarah's backpack along with the evidence. Then, he crouched down, gripping Coda's fur, looking straight into his loyal companion's eyes. "Buddy, her out of here." Get Coda let out a low, steady grow, sound of understanding, of absolute certainty. He knew exactly what he had to do. Nathan handed the backpack to Sarah, to take the sewer exit behind the ollie. "If you move now, they won't catch you in time." Sarah opened her mouth to argue. She knew Nathan was sacrificing himself to buy them time, but she also knew this was the only way. Her fingers tightened around the straps, and she drew in a slow, steady breath. "Are you sure?" And Nathan didn't answer right away. Instead, he smiled, just briefly, his expression softening for the smallest moment. Then, he rested a hand on Coda's head. "Seafool protect you. Now go." The Sarah swallowed hard, then glanced down at Coda. "Come on, buddy." Without hesitation, Coda bolted after her, his eyes burning with determination. Nathan inhaled deeply. Then he facing the darkness closing in. A cold, sharp smile flickered across his lips. "All right," he muttered, rolling his shoulders, his fist tightening. "Let's do this." Sarah Mitchell sprinted the underground tunnels, her footsteps echoing in the cramped, suffocating space. Beside her, Coda kept pace effortlessly, his lean frame gliding over puddles of stagnant water on the damp concrete floor. Her ragged breaths mixed with the faint reverberation of their movement against the walls. They had to make it out, before the hunters closed in. But then, Coda stopped. His entire body went rigid, nose flaring as he sniffed frantically at the damp ground. Sarah skidded to a halt, her heart hammering. "Coda," she whispered, her breath still ragged, but the dog didn't respond. Instead began digging. His claws scraped against the old concrete, dirt and debris flying in all directions. Sarah dropped to her knees, eyes locked onto him, and within seconds, a small metal box surfaced. Sarah's stomach clenched as she reached out, picking it up with trembling fingers. The box was old, rusted, but still intact. She pried the lid open, and what she saw inside made her entire words stop. Confidential documents. Proof of the entire corruption network, not just Harding, not just the dirty cops, but the one truly pulling the strings. Sarah's eyes locked onto a single sheet of paper, her gaze landing on a name scrawled hastily in the margin. Ere her throat went dry as she read it. She knew this name. The person had never appeared in any investigation, never left a trace, but had always been the one pulling the strings. Sarah's voice was barely above a whisper, trembling with realization. "This is the one behind everything." Coda looked up at her, his loyal eyes sharp with awareness. They had found what no one was supposed to find. And now, they weren't just investigators anymore. They were targets. Nathan stood his ground, surrounded. The assassins moved in cold, efficient, the kind of men who had silenced people before. One of them stepped forward, raising his gun, the barrel aimed directly at Nathan's head. "This is the end, Reed." Nathan let out a dry chuckle, despite the adrenaline raging through his veins. "You think so?" A distant siren cut through the night. Sarah had gotten the signal out in time. The hitman hesitated, just long enough. Nathan didn't waste a second. He lunged forward, throwing a brutal punch straight into the assassin's face. The gun flew from his hands. With the reflex of a seasoned fighter, Nathan snatched the weapon midair, twisting sharply, and turned it on the next attacker. The remaining assassins lunged forward. But this time, they weren't the hunters. They were the hunted. And Nathan, he wasn't letting them escape. Sarah Mitchell stepped into the judge's office, placing the file on the desk with an undeniable finality. The evidence against Aerie. The one behind everything. It turned out Air wasn't just initials. He was a powerful politician, a man who had used the police force, manipulated justice, and shielded criminals, all to secure his own power. But this time, there was nowhere left to hide. The entire police department shook as names were dragged into the light. Corrupt officials arrested. Air exposed to the public. The system that once protected criminals had no choice but to face its reckoning. And justice finally won. For the first time in months, Nathan Reed felt at peace. Standing in his front yard, he watched Co's loyal partner, his battle-worn companion, run freely across the grass. Ears perked, tail wagging, no tension left in his sharp amber eyes. For the first time in a long time, they were both free. Nathan smiled softly. He knelt down, placing a hand on Coda's head, his voice low and filled with emotion. "We did it, buddy." Coda wagged his tail, then pressed his head against Nathan's chest. No words were needed. Just absolute trust. A bond that could never be broken. Because this story wasn't just about a fight for justice. It was proof of something greater. Loyalty cannot be shaken. And the truth will always find its way to the light. If this story resonated with you, support us by hitting like and subscribing. Thank you for being part of this journey.